Okay, welcome. Welcome to a lesson on, and let me actually title this, How to Loop. Do the loop-de-loop in Rust. Okay. So looping is very important in languages programmatically, in general. So why? What is a loop and why does it matter? Really. So just to break it down in simple terms, if you have a block of code, if you write like a bunch of code, let's say you want to repeat that code multiple times, okay, and that and that happens a lot. That's actually one of the most important parts to programming, is the idea that you can take instructions and then repeat those instructions, get the computer to repeat it so that we don't have to, right? And when you do that, what does that remind you of? Well, maybe like a calculator, right? Think about a calculator, basic calculations. You could run a loop numerically, and then the loop can do the calculation for you. But what is that? Well, that's just instructions. It's a block of code that you're repeating multiple times, like 4 times 12, then store that value, then multiply it by 12 again, multiply it by 12 again, and then you're repeating until you tell it to stop. And that's another important thing. That takes us to our second part about loops, which is the sequential element of programming. So programming generally has a sequential path in which it moves from one element in a sequence to the next. Well, just think about a trickling effect, like a waterfall flows in a certain direction and each statement has to happen one at a time. So think about a function. In a function, for example, we haven't really covered functions so deeply besides writing these functions out, but when we write these functions out, generally in programming, whatever you write first, well, that's going to happen first off in the function, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and that's sequentially happening one at a time. Sequentially, instructions being executed one at a time, first followed by the next. So what's interesting, and this is something with looping, and in programming in general, what's interesting is how we could actually manipulate the execution path, play with the sequence, depending on how we want to customize the program. And that's really how you get to build a program that's going to do something specifically for certain tasks, to complete certain things. All right. And hopefully that's pretty clear, makes sense. But the best way to really look at it, the best way to really understand this and understand loops and how it kind of comes into play here would be to look at some examples, right? And to test it out. So Rust has 3 types of core loops, not care loops, of core loops for executing blocks of code, okay? So we have the while loop, we have the loop, okay? Let me make these underscore. And we have the for loop, okay? So these are 3. And you could actually categorize these 3 loops into 2 categories. The while and the loop, which would be indefinite type loops, and the for loop, which is a definite type of loop, okay? And so what that really means is that the for loop, which is definite, we set up the parameter of when the loop starts and when the loop ends, okay? Whereas the while loop and the loop, what they're doing is they're checking to see. They're just going to keep on looping indefinitely until a certain condition is met, okay? And because of the way they're structured differently, either or could work better for depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And the intuition behind that generally just comes with practice and lots of examples. So let's stop the video right here, and in the next video, let's actually go through each type of loop.